There are a million ways to die serving the Emperor, but only one way that matters, screaming his name as you charge into the teeth of hell itself. Today's story follows the brutal fate that awaits every conscript foolish enough, or unlucky enough, to answer the Imperium's call. I'm Trooper Cass Varon, formerly of Hive Tertius on Mordian Prime, currently of the 47th Mordian Iron Guard. 3 months ago, I was pulling double shifts in the Promethium refineries. Today, I'm telling you what happens when the Administratum decides your life belongs to the Emperor. If you crave more tales from this dark millennium where human life is the cheapest currency of all, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who support the channel, and you'll need all the protection you can get. The transport, Throne's Will, shuddered as it broke through Koraxia IV's atmosphere, and I pressed my face against the grimy porthole. Below stretched an endless wasteland of mud, shell craters, and the twisted wreckage of vehicles I couldn't identify. Smoke columns rose like incense to a sky the color of dried blood. "Emperor's teeth," whispered Yorick, the scrawny kid from the neighboring Hab block who'd been conscripted alongside me. His hands shook as he gripped his standard-issue lasgun, a weapon none of us had fired more than twice during our 3-week training aboard ship. 3 weeks to turn factory workers and hive scum into soldiers of the Imperium. The veteran sergeants had laughed when they said it. We hadn't understood why then. Around us, 200 other conscripts sat in identical positions, back straight, weapons ready, trying to look like soldiers instead of what we really were, scared children playing dress-up in flak armor that smelled like the previous owner's fear, sweat, and death. The crimson sashes across our chests marked us as fresh meat, though none of us knew it yet. Sergeant Corvin stood at the transport's center, a scarred veteran whose left arm ended in a mechanical replacement that whirred softly when he moved. His voice cut through the engine noise like a chainsword through flesh. "Listen up, you worthless meat sacks! In approximately 4 minutes, you'll be stepping on holy Imperial soil, currently contested by Xenos filth. Your job is simple. Point your lasgun at anything that isn't wearing the Emperor's colors and pull the trigger until it stops moving or you stop breathing. Questions?" Nobody dared ask any. We'd learned that lesson during our first day aboard ship when Conscript Hallett asked about leave rotation. Corvin had explained very patiently that the only leave an Imperial Guardsman earned was a pine box and a plot in consecrated ground, if there was enough left to bury. The transport bucked violently, throwing us against our restraints. Through the porthole, I saw a streak of light lance upward from the planet's surface, some kind of anti-aircraft fire that missed us by meters. My stomach lurched, and not just from the turbulence. 30 seconds, Corvin barked. "Remember, you serve the Emperor now. Your life isn't yours anymore. It belongs to him, and he's loaning it to me. I decide when and how you spend it. First man who runs gets a bolt round in the back of the skull. Second man who runs gets the same. Anyone else feeling creative about their life expectancy?" The silence was absolute, except for the transport's engines and someone quietly reciting the Imperial prayer. I found myself mouthing along, "The Emperor protects the faithful. The Emperor preserves the pure. The Emperor guides the righteous." The words felt hollow. Looking at Yorick's pale face, at the way his knuckles had gone white around his weapon, and the mixture of terror and desperate hope in every conscript's eyes, I wondered if the Emperor was really listening to prayers from a transport full of expendable meat heading into a war zone. The ramp began to lower with a mechanical groan, and suddenly we could hear it. The distant crack of lasgun fire, the thunder of artillery, and underneath it all something that made my blood freeze. Screaming. Human screaming that rose and fell like some hellish tide. Hot air rushed in, thick with smoke and the metallic stench of blood. In the distance, explosions painted the horizon in brief, violent colors. "Welcome to Koraxia IV," Sergeant Corvin shouted over the noise. "The garden spot of the Moldoran system. The locals are a bit hostile, but don't take it personally. They just need some education in Imperial values." He gestured toward the ramp with his mechanical arm. "Now, get your worthless hides off my transport and go teach 'em the Emperor's will. For the Emperor! For the Emperor!" we screamed back, our voices cracking with youth and fear. As I stumbled down the ramp with the others, my boots hitting mud that squelched with more than just water, I caught my first real smell of a war zone. Cordite, burning promethium, and underneath it all, the sweet, sick stench of decay. This was it. This was where boys from the hives came to die for the glory of the Imperium. Behind us, the transport was already lifting off, abandoning us to our fate. Ahead lay our new home, a trench line that stretched beyond sight, filled with mud, misery, and men who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. The trenches of Koraxia IV were a maze carved from misery itself. We stumbled through communication passages barely wide enough for a man, past sandbag walls stained dark with substances I didn't want to identify. Veterans watched us past with the hollow stares of men who'd seen too many replacement waves arrive and disappear. "Fresh meat," someone called out, and bitter laughter followed us deeper into the labyrinth. I tried to stand straighter, to look like I belonged, but the weight of my pack and the unfamiliar bulk of my flak armor made me feel like a child wearing his father's clothes. Jorik stayed close beside me, his breathing shallow and quick. "Cass, what's that smell?" I knew what it was, but saying it would make it real. The trenches reeked of human waste, fear sweat, and the cloying sweetness of gangrene. Somewhere in the distance, a man was sobbing, not the sharp cry of fresh pain, but the broken whimper of someone whose spirit had snapped like overstressed metal. Sergeant Corvin led our group to a section of trench where a handful of veterans waited. Their flak armor was patched, repatched, and scorched black in places. Their lasguns showed the careful maintenance of men who knew their lives depended on their weapons' function. When they looked at us, I saw no welcome, only the calculating stare of men measuring how long we might last. "Corporal Thane," Corvin addressed a lean man whose left eye had been replaced with an augmetic unit that clicked and whirred as it focused on different visual spectrums. 20 fresh bodies for your section. Try to keep some of them alive long enough to learn which end of a lasgun to hold." Thane's organic eye studied us with professional disinterest. "How long have they been training?" 3 weeks. Emperor's mercy. 3 weeks? Last batch had 6 weeks, and they lasted 4 hours. What makes you think these ones'll do better? "They won't," Corvin replied, matter-of-factly, "but maybe a few will survive long enough to become useful. That's your job, Corporal. Make them useful or make them dead. I don't care which." As Corvin walked away, Thane stepped closer to us. His augmetic eye clicked as it cycled through different visual spectrums, examining each conscript like a tech priest evaluating machinery. "Listen carefully, because I'll only say this once. Forget everything you think you know about war. Forget the propaganda reels. Forget the heroic ballads. This isn't glory, this is mathematics. The enemy has more bodies than we have ammunition. Our job is to make that equation work in the Emperor's favor." A distant whistle made the veterans immediately duck and press against the trench walls. We conscripts stood there like idiots until Thane screamed, "Incoming!" The world exploded. Artillery shells impacted 50 meters away, showering us with mud and debris that included fragments I desperately hoped weren't organic. My ears rang like cathedral bells, and I found myself pressed into the trench wall, gasping and shaking. When the barrage ended, Thane was already moving. "Right then, lessons over. The enemy has our range. Time to move." He led us along a connecting trench toward the forward positions. The walls here showed impact marks from bullets and shrapnel. Rats scattered from our path, rats grown fat on things I didn't want to consider. "Sir," Jorek managed to stammer, "how long do we usually hold positions like this?" Thane's laugh held no humor. "Hold? Son, we don't hold anything out here. We just die slower than the enemy. Sometimes that's enough." We emerged into a fire step position where several veterans were already scanning the wasteland through periscopes and magnoscopes. The no man's land beyond stretched for kilometers, a hellscape of shell craters, razor wire, and the twisted remains of vehicles from both sides. "There!" Thane pointed toward a distant ridge where movement flickered. "Ork positions. Green bastards have been testing our lines for 6 days now. Today feels different, though. They're massing for something big." As if summoned by his words, the ground began to vibrate, a low rumble that started in our boots and worked its way up into our bones. The veterans immediately began checking their weapons and ammunition supplies. "What's happening?" I asked. Thane's augmetic eyes zoomed in on the ridge. "Waaagh, incoming. Big one by the sound of it." He turned to address all of us conscripts. "Right then, fresh meat. Time for your baptism. Remember, aim for center mass, keep firing until your power pack dies, and if you're going to die, die standing up. The Emperor expects nothing less." The rumble was growing louder. Over the ridge, a cloud of dust was rising like a brown storm, and within that dust, I could see shapes moving, lots of them. "Fix bayonets!" Thane commanded. The sound of steel sliding against steel mixed with whispered prayers and muffled curses. My hands shook as I attached my bayonet, the blade catching the dim light filtering through the smoke-stained sky. "Still with us in the darkness?" Thane called out. "Good, because this is where we find out who's got the Emperor's favor and who's just taking up space in his universe." The ground shook harder now. Whatever was coming, it was big enough to make the earth itself tremble.
The orcs hit us like a green tide of death and madness. They came screaming across no man's land in a rolling wave of crude armor, roaring engines and weapons that shouldn't have functioned but somehow spat death with terrifying efficiency. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The ground shook under their advance as ramshackle vehicles bounced over shell craters, belching black smoke and defying every law of engineering. "Open fire!" Thane roared. The trench erupted in crimson light as 50 lasguns discharged simultaneously. I squeezed my trigger, felt the familiar kick of the weapon, and watched my shot disappear into the charging horde. Beside me, Yorick was firing wildly, tears streaming down his face as he screamed wordless prayers to the Emperor. The first volley dropped maybe a dozen orcs. The rest kept coming. "Keep firing," Thane commanded, his own lasgun barking steadily as he picked targets with mechanical precision. "Sustained rate, make every shot count." My second shot took an orc in the chest. The beast stumbled, but didn't fall, just roared louder and kept charging. These weren't the mindless savages from the propaganda reels. These were killing machines bred for war, and they were almost on top of us. A crude rocket streaked overhead and detonated behind our trench, showering us with debris. Private Keller, a conscript who'd bunked next to me on the transport, screamed as shrapnel tore through his shoulder. He dropped his lasgun and clutched at the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. "Medic!" someone yelled. But there was no time. The orcs were 30 meters away and closing fast. "Grenades!" Thane commanded. "Throw everything you have!" I yanked the frag grenade from my belt, pulled the pin and hurled it toward the nearest cluster of greenskins. The explosion carved a gap in their line, but more poured through to fill it. Always more. 20 meters. I could see their faces now, scarred, tusked monstrosities that grinned as they charged into our fire. Their crude weapons, shoddily built but deadly effective, returned fire in wild bursts that chewed chunks from our sandbag walls. Conscript Valor, 2 positions down from me, took a slug round to the head. He simply ceased to exist from the neck up, his body toppling backward into the trench. I vomited, but kept firing. There was nothing else to do. 15 meters. The lead orc, a massive brute with a mechanical arm that ended in a spinning saw, leaped onto our wire obstacles and began tearing through them with inhuman strength. Thane put 3 las rounds into its chest. It kept coming. "Bayonets!" Thane screamed. "Close combat!" The first greenskin dropped into our trench like a green avalanche of muscle and fury. I thrust my bayonet forward, felt it scrape off crude armor, then someone slammed me from behind. Everything became a chaos of screaming blood and desperate violence. An orc loomed over me, raising a massive cleaver that would split me from skull to sternum. I rolled aside as the blade carved a furrow in the trench floor where my head had been. My lasgun was gone, lost somewhere in the melee. I grabbed a shovel from the trench wall and swung it with all my strength at the beast's knee. The entrenching tool bit deep, and the orc howled in rage and pain. It backhanded me across the face, and I felt my nose break in a spray of blood. But the creature stumbled, and that gave me enough time to draw my lace pistol and put 3 rounds into its throat at point-blank range. Green blood fountained across the trench walls as the beast toppled backward. Around me, the battle raged in a dozen individual duels to death. Yorick was locked in desperate combat with an orc wielding a crude axe, using his rifle butt to deflect blows that would have cleaved him in half. Thane fought like a machine, his augmetic eye tracking targets while his hands worked his chainsword with surgical precision. But we were losing. For every orc we killed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Keller was dead now, torn apart by an orc's power claw. Half our section was already down, their blood mixing with the mud beneath our boots. "Fall back!" Thane commanded, his voice cutting through the battle chaos. "Fighting withdrawal to secondary positions." We stumbled backward through the communication trenches, carrying our wounded when we could, leaving our dead where they fell. Behind us, the orcs howled in triumph as they claimed our forward positions. But their celebration was short-lived, for Thane had called in artillery support on our own trenches. The barrage began as we reached the secondary line. Our former positions disappeared in explosions that threw orc body parts high into the smoke-stained sky. But even as the shells fell, I could see more greenskins massing on the ridge. This had been just the first wave. "How many?" I gasped, trying to staunch the bleeding from my broken nose. Thane's augmetic eye whirred as it scanned the enemy positions. "Thousands," he said matter-of-factly. "Maybe tens of thousands. This isn't a raid, it's a full war." Yorick was shaking uncontrollably, his uniform soaked with green blood that wasn't his own. "We can't hold against that many. It's impossible." "Nothing's impossible if you're willing to pay the price." Thane checked his chrono and frowned. "Reinforcements won't arrive for 6 hours. We need to hold until then." 6 hours. Looking at what was left of our section, maybe 15 men out of the original 20, I wondered if any of us would live to see those reinforcements arrive.
The Commissar arrived during the lull between the second and third Ork assaults, striding through the carnage like death itself wore a black greatcoat. Commissar Vex was a tall, pale man whose face looked like it had been carved from marble by someone with limited artistic talent. His bolt pistol gleamed at his hip, and his chainsword hummed softly in its sheath. Weapons that had ended more Imperial lives than enemy ones, if the whispers were true. "Corporal Thane." His voice carried the cultured accent of Terran nobility mixed with the authority of absolute power. "Report." "Sir, 3 major assaults repelled, 60% casualties across the line, ammunition down to 30%. The men are doing their duty," Vex finished coldly. His pale eyes swept across our battered section, cataloging faces, measuring resolve. When his gaze fell on Yorick, still trembling from combat shock, those eyes narrowed. Or they should be. I felt ice form in my stomach. Every guardsman knew the Commissar's role, maintaining morale and discipline through fear. The bolt pistol at his hip wasn't for enemy Xenos. It was for soldiers who failed the Emperor's expectations. "Trooper," Vex addressed Yorick directly. "You're shaking." Yes, sir. First combat, sir. I'll do better, I swear by the Golden Throne." "Will you?" Vex stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his pistol grip. "Because doubt spreads faster than plague in trenches like these. 1 man's fear becomes 10 men's terror. 10 men's terror becomes a company's rout." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Around us, the remaining soldiers watched without moving, scarcely breathing. We all knew how this could end, with Yorick's brains decorating the trench wall and the rest of us learning what happened to those who showed weakness. Then the Voxcaster at Tane's belt crackled to life. All sections, all sections. Massive enemy movement detected on the horizon. Estimated enemy strength. Static overwhelmed the transmission for a moment. Conservatively, 10,000 hostiles inbound. Artillery support unavailable due to ammunition shortage. Reinforcements delayed until 0800 hours tomorrow. Emperor, preserve us. Vex smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on a human face. It seems the Emperor provides his own lessons in courage. "Trooper," he turned back to Yorick, "you have approximately 10 minutes to decide whether you'll die as a coward or a hero. I suggest you choose wisely." The ground began to shake again. This time the vibration was deeper, more sustained. Whatever was coming made the previous assaults look like skirmishes. "Sir," I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. "Commissar, sir, request permission to speak freely." Vex's attention shifted to me like the barrel of an artillery piece. "Granted, trooper. Your last words should be memorable." "We're not going to survive this," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. 10,000 orcs against maybe 100 guardsmen. The mathematics don't work in our favor. Several soldiers inhaled sharply. questioning Imperial strategy was dancing on the edge of heresy, and we all knew it. But Vex nodded slowly. "You're correct, trooper. You're all going to die here. Every last one of you will be feeding the worms before tomorrow's dawn. The question is whether your deaths will have meaning." He gestured toward the enemy positions where dust clouds now rose like brown thunder clouds. "Every minute you hold delays their advance. Every orc you kill is one less monster threatening the civilians evacuating from Hive Secundus. Your deaths, properly spent, will save 10,000 Imperial lives." The Commissar drew his bolt pistol and held it up where we could all see it. "This weapon has 12 rounds. 11 are for any man who runs. The 12th is for myself, because I'll die here with you, rather than live with the shame of retreat. The Emperor demands no less." Yorick had stopped shaking. Something in Vex's words, or maybe just the absolute certainty of death, had steadied him. "Sir," he said quietly, "how do we make it count? By selling your lives dearly, by making every round count, by ensuring that when the Xenos finally overrun this position, they do so over a carpet of their own dead." He holstered his pistol and drew his chainsword. The weapon's growl filled the trench like an angry predator. "By showing these alien filth what it means to face the Imperial Guard." The shaking was getting stronger now. Over the ridge I could see the dark mass of the Ork horde, a green tide that stretched from horizon to horizon. Crude war machines belched smoke as they advanced, while infantry swarmed around them like deadly insects. Tane handed out the last of our ammunition, 2 power packs per man, 40 shots each to hold back 10,000 enemies. The mathematics of survival became the mathematics of sacrifice. "Remember," Commissar Vex called out as the enemy horde crested the ridge, "the Emperor watches. Make him proud." Beside me, Yorick checked his weapon one last time. His hands were steady now, his face set with grim determination. "For the Emperor," he whispered. "For the Emperor," I replied. The comment section's going to love this. Subscribe if you want to see how this ends. The tension builds as our heroes prepare for their final stand against impossible odds. 10,000 orcs began their descent toward our thin line of defiance, and we raised our weapons to meet them. They came like a living avalanche of green death, and we met them with lass fire and prayers. The final assault began at dusk, when the smoke-stained sky turned the color of dried blood. 10,000 orcs descended from the ridge in a tide that stretched beyond sight. Infantry, war machines, and creatures I had no names for. The ground trembled under their advance until I could feel it in my bones, in my teeth, in the desperate rhythm of my heart. "First rank, fire!" Thane commanded. Our line erupted in crimson light. 40 las guns discharged as one, carving bloody furrows through the leading edge of the green tide. Orcs toppled, stumbled, roared in pain and fury, but the horde kept coming. For every beast we dropped, a dozen more surged forward to take its place. "Second rank, fire!" Another volley. More bodies fell into the mud, but now I could see individual faces in the charging mass, scarred, tusked visages twisted with battle lust. They were close enough that I could smell them, crude metal, unwashed flesh, and the acrid stench of their primitive fuel. "Independent fire!" Thane roared. "Make every shot count!" I sighted on a massive orc wielding a weapon cobbled together from scrap metal and malice. My last bolt took its center mass, spinning it around but not dropping it. The beast roared and kept charging, green blood streaming from its wound. I fired again, this shot punching through its thick skull. Finally it fell. Beside me, Jorik was firing with mechanical precision, no longer the terrified boy who'd trembled during the first assault. Each shot found its mark. Each bolt of energy meant one less monster reaching our line. He'd found his courage in the certainty of death. Maybe that was the only place it could be found. The first enemy reached our wire obstacles. Massive brutes began tearing through the razor wire with their bare hands, ignoring the cuts that flayed their flesh. Behind them, crude rockets streaked overhead to detonate in our rear positions. Shrapnel whined through the air like metal wasps seeking blood. "Grenades!" Commissar Vex commanded, his bolt pistol barking as he put precise rounds into advancing enemies. "Everything you have!" I pulled my last 2 frag grenades, armed them both, and hurled them into the thickest part of the assault. The explosions carved gaps in their line, but the gaps filled immediately. Always more. Always endless waves of green death rolling toward us. They were in the wire now. The first orc dropped into our trench, a scarred veteran with metal teeth and arms like tree trunks. Thane met it with his chainsword, the weapon's teeth chewing through crude armor and alien flesh. But even as the beast fell, 2 more took its place. The trench became a charnel house. I emptied my last power pack into an orc's chest at point-blank range, then drew my combat knife as another beast lunged for my throat. The blade skittered off its crude armor, and massive hands closed around my neck. The world started going dark when Jorik appeared behind the creature, driving his bayonet deep into its spine. Green blood fountained as the orc arched in agony, releasing me to claw at the steel protruding from its back. I gasped air into my burning lungs and drove my knife up under its ribs, searching for something vital. The beast toppled backward, taking Jorik with it. I heard him cry out, a sound of pain mixed with desperate fury. When I reached him, I found the orc's claws had opened his stomach like a butcher's cut. Blood soaked his uniform, too much blood. "Cass," he gasped, his face gone gray pale. "Can't feel my legs." "You'll be fine," I lied, dragging him behind what remained of our sandbag wall. "Medic is coming." But there were no medics left. There was nobody left except the few of us still fighting in this corner of hell. The orcs had broken through our line in a dozen places. Individual guardsmen made desperate last stands among the corpses of their comrades, selling their lives 1 shot at a time. Commissar Vex stood atop the trench wall, his chainsword painting arcs of green blood through the air as he cut down enemy after enemy. His black greatcoat was shredded, his face bloodied, but he fought like an avatar of the Emperor's wrath made flesh. His voice carried over the battle din. "Stand fast! Die well! The Emperor watches!" An orc rocket struck the wall beside him. The explosion hurled his broken body into the trench, where he landed in a crumpled heap. But even dying, he raised his bolt pistol and put his final round through an enemy skull before his eyes went dark forever. Thane was the last officer standing, his augmetic eye shattered, but his weapon still firing. He looked around at what remained of our section, maybe 5 men out of hundreds who'd started the day, and made his final command decision. "Close ranks," he ordered quietly. "Form square, back to back. We die together." We formed our pathetic little square among the corpses of our friends. 5 Imperial Guardsmen with empty weapons and the promise of death. Around us, hundreds of orcs closed in for the kill, their victory cries echoing across the ruined battlefield. I looked at Jorik, still breathing but fading fast, at Thane, standing straight despite his wounds, at the other survivors whose names I'd never learned but who'd fought like heroes beside me. "For the Emperor," I said. "For the Emperor," they replied. The orcs charged. We raised our bayonets and met them head-on, selling the last seconds of our lives as dearly as we could. This was what it meant to serve the Imperium. Not glory, not heroism, but the simple mathematics of sacrifice. Our deaths here would delay the enemy advance by perhaps an hour. Maybe that would be enough for the civilians to escape. Maybe our sacrifice would matter. In the final moments, as alien claws tore through my flak armor and crude blades sought my heart, I heard something impossible over the sounds of battle, the distant rumble of Imperial aircraft engines, the reinforcements Thane had promised arriving just too late to save us, but perhaps in time to avenge us. I smiled as the darkness took me. We'd held. Against impossible odds, with impossible courage, we'd held long enough. The Emperor protects those who serve faithfully even unto death. The artillery barrage that followed our last stand turned the entire sector into a crater-pocked wasteland. The Ork horde, bunched together as they overran our positions, was caught in the open when the Valkyries arrived with their payloads of death. Thousands of greenskins died in those first minutes, more than our entire regiment had managed to kill in weeks of fighting. But that's not the real story, is it? The real story is simpler and more terrible. Somewhere in the Imperium, a new batch of conscripts is boarding transports right now, heading for their own appointments with death. Fresh-faced boys and girls who think they're going to be heroes, who believe the propaganda about glory and honor and the Emperor's protection. They'll learn, as we learned, that there's only one lesson the Imperial Guard teaches: how to die well. Some will break under the pressure. Others will find courage they never knew they possessed. A precious few might even survive long enough to become veterans, to pass the lesson on to the next wave of conscripts. That's the brutal mathematics of the 41st millennium. Human life is the cheapest resource the Imperium possesses, and it spends that currency without hesitation or regret. Every day, millions of guardsmen die in trenches like ours, holding lines that exist only on classified tactical displays, buying time measured in minutes and hours for objectives they'll never understand. We were expendable. We knew it, accepted it, and died for it anyway. Because in the end, that's what loyalty means in the dark millennium. The willingness to spend your life like a coin tossed into the Emperor's collection plate, hoping your sacrifice adds up to something greater than the sum of your fear. The Emperor's light burns eternal, but it casts the longest shadows. And in those shadows, boys become soldiers, soldiers become corpses, and corpses become forgotten statistics in the administratum's endless ledgers. Such is the brutal fate of conscripts in the Imperial Guard. Such is the price of humanity's survival in a galaxy that knows no mercy.